This podcast has turned gruesome quite suddenly. I love it. We've gone from AI to how to die if a volcano explodes. So
Yeah,
maybe
that's
we'll get
all.
back to AI.
That's all because you just went away grabbing your late dinner, your late lunch.
Yes, yeah, my late lunch cost us a whole bunch of human life. Oh
There you go.
no!
Oh, gee. Welcome to the What's Your Baseline podcast, where we demystify enterprise architecture and business process management.
We're here to bring best practices and lessons learned from our years to your ears, as well as interviewing friends we met along the way on our professional journeys.
My name is Roland Volt, and I'm joined today by my co-host, JM Erlinson. Hey, JM, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Roland. You know, it's getting a little warmer. It's kind of rainy in Toronto where I am, but honestly, it's peaceful. It's not too cold. It's not too warm. It's like right in the middle, and that's where I like it. I go for long walks. I enjoy the season, and honestly, it's spring and fall that I really fall in love with. How are you feeling, my friend?
Well, it's summer here. Period. So outside it's in the 80s, so 30 degrees Celsius for our friends in up north. And I'm in my little basement office and have to wear long sleeves because it's damn cold down here. So yeah.
My goodness. Well, I'm excited we get a chance to chat again today. And today I think we have a really fascinating topic and guest. There have been a few different developments in the space of AI, particularly as we use it in BPM. We've already had a chance to speak to other folks who talked about the philosophy behind AI, the different ways we can use it, how it's growing and building. But it's been a couple of years, I think, Roland. Last time we had a really serious conversation about AI with somebody who understands particularly what it's going to mean to the practitioners and the practice leaders of process excellence, process architecture, enterprise architecture practices in the industry. And I got to tell you, I'm really excited for our friend today. So, Roland, why don't you give him a little bit of introduction and let him introduce himself afterwards?
Oh, yeah. So quick and short and sweet. We have Scott Armstrong here from Interfacing, a BPM vendor.
Hey!
And Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you both. I'm here in Montreal, and I could say that the weather is quite nice today, 19 degrees JM, and which is big for Montreal.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, the last time I was there was in December and January, and it was not 19 degrees, not at all.
Lovely place, but hold it for the summer.
I remember when I was in Calgary many years ago. I was wearing. It was in January, February. I went to Calgary, Edmonton for a consulting gig, and I was wearing a trench coat and a sweater. And the hotel lobby person looked at me and they're like, "You're not gonna leave the hotel in a trench coat and sweater." And I was like, "Is this not enough?" And she's like, "You're going to die." So yes, there are some exposure risks when you go to places a little bit more north in Canada. But Scott, we're excited to have you on the podcast today. So Roland mentioned you from Interfacing. Tell us a little bit about yourself, a little background. Let our listeners know who you are professionally, and then we'll ask you a couple more questions.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, at heart, I'm an entrepreneur and have been with Interfacing now for over 20 years, if you can believe it. I know time flies. Interfacing, if you're not aware of the organization, for your listeners out there, has been in the BPM space now since the early 90s. I mean, before BPM existed, it was really BPR at the time, business process reengineering, till right the Michael Hammer years of early 2000s became the BPM movement. So interfacing dates back a long time in this space from initial discrete simulation engine. Then in the late 90s, did a Visio add-on, which before everyone knows became Microsoft Visio. This was a pre-Microsoft years with Visio even. So it was like taking the concept of modeling within Visio environment, which was flat mapping, and then actually became one of the first repository-based solutions in the early 2000s, and since then has really ventured beyond BPM, really covering what we call integrated management suite, which is really covering the core BPM capabilities, whether that be modeling or mapping, modeling, analysis, mining, simulation, lean, all those topics, but also reaching into the GRC world, quality management world, and automation.
Before we jump into the big pool of AI and BPM, which, by the way, for those who haven't recognized, is obviously the topic of our show today. Um, I wanted to ask you about you as a person. Tell us a little bit about you. What are your hobbies? What are your interests? What's your bucket list items? Um, so that our audience get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, sure. So I guess long story short, I've been with the company a long time, and now I'm the CEO of Interfacing. So and a partner, owner, and as well as with my partners who we have ownership in some other organizations for consultation as well. That's on the professional side, as well as I have some other side business ventures that we were talking about earlier. Um, but on the personal side, what do I like doing outside of work? Well, I am a workaholic. I will say I do. Work drives me, and I love accountability. I love building things. I love winning big deals, these types of things. So it's not just for work for me. For me, it's a personal passion, more than anything, more than money. And on the as well as I'm a how can I say, a work harder, play harder type of guy, meaning do everything to the extreme. So I'm known to play really hard too, meaning go above and beyond in your work life. But when it's time to play, it's time to have a good time too. So go above and beyond whenever you can in whatever you're doing. That's sort of how I live my life. Big skier, too.
Oh, cool.
Used to do mogul competitions, so really, really strong in the bumps and in the woods. As being an East Coast, right, we
Hmm.
ski below the ski tree line versus above the tree line, so you're pretty much in the woods all the time. But nowadays, the East Coast hasn't been getting the snow it used to, so sort of have to venture out west each year to get the good snow that we grew up on. So big skier, that would be, I guess, my passion.
What's your favorite place to go skiing?
I have a cottage at Jay Peak, so I go there regularly. I now have a place at Tremblant as well. So that would be my two main East Coast hills, Tremblant and Jay Peak. But out west, I try to go to a different hill each year, Whistler, Banff, Sunshine, or in the Alps in Europe. So
That sounds like a cool way to sort of doing tourism, like peak tourism, skiing each hill one at a time, learning the slope and feeling it out. I've had a lot of fun. Tremblant is one of my favorite places, but I really love Whistler as well. It's Tremblant obviously a little closer to me in Toronto, but yeah, you made some pretty cool choices, my friend, and that's awesome. So let's ask the big question that about your reasons for being here. The first is what brought you to BPM and what brought AI to you in the context of BPM, and then let's define that term and go with it. So why are you in this business, and why do you think AI as a concept is important to this business?
so BPM, as I touched on earlier, I mean, I sort of fell into it, to be honest. In terms of the role in joining interfacing. That's really the reality of how I got into BPM.
Hmm.
But in terms of as a company, what what we strive to do and what I strive to do and really is not continue to build the same wheel, meaning remain a status quo. I'm a big believer in change. So although sometimes large organizations are slower moving, and there's a lot of red tape and often adoption is a challenge, I I like staying at the head of the curve of new technology, and that's what brought AI to us. Really, is not being scared of it, but trying to get to it earlier on. Where a lot of the competitors are in the space. We're focused a lot on the mining aspect. And of course, AI is a part of mining. It wasn't an area that we really, I wouldn't say believed in as much because the reason why I'll say that is on the mining side. I remember when that was APD, automated process discovery,
Yeah.
which red evolved into the mining. People don't even know that. They just because money gets put behind mining and it blew up all of a sudden. But I was like, well, Fujitsu was doing this at 10 years ago, but without the AI
Oh
portion,
yeah.
right? People don't even realize that. So, and I knew at the time when we had done it back then, the amount of time and effort you got to put in to actually get the results out. And as you've seen now, the curve again, sort of that hype cycle is now on a downward a bit on the mining because of that, because of failed projects, right? A lot of investment. They don't see the value. So when everyone was hyped a lot on that, I was like, we sort of did that. Like I went through that maybe 10 years ago and saw that the same hype cycle and it failed at the time. So, but I don't believe is a hype cycle. That's the difference. I don't think it's just the new flashy thing that's going to go away in 2 years.
I'm really curious about that. So, what makes you believe that this is not on the hype cycle? Or to say it in other words, maybe it's a two-pronged question that I have. The first one is, what can users expect? Because obviously AI as a term, artificial intelligence could be
Mhm.
in the mind of people, could be anything and nothing. From the Terminator scenario, our overlords kill us, to, oh yeah, we got a little widget that helps us a little bit more. So that's the first thing, that I would ask you for, how you see this or how you define it. And then obviously, what can the users expect, maybe short term, midterm, long term? And I just leave it up to you how you define short, midterm, long term. But I'm curious about
Sure.
your uh, assessment of this, because, well, I'm pretty sure it will go up the hype cycle that you just mentioned for process mining. Maybe not today, and maybe we're still in that upward phase, but at some point in time, inevitably, it will go down.
So, I mean, you raise a good point. What is AI? It's like that keyword that everyone's throwing around and could be used for anything and everything. I think it's part of the problem, people understanding, but that takes time. So, and then so what I mean is in its most simplest term, I feel it's computers that will be replacing normally what requires human intelligence, meaning it's
Mm-hmm.
not can be written as a rule, a hard coded rule. It, it's based off learning and experience and reasoning and generalizing that it could make decisions. Meaning, at the end of the day, in its simplest term, is statistical algorithms, right? But off of such
Mm-hmm.
tremendous amount of data that one human could never hold. And that's how I see why it'll never go away and why it's invaluable to every area of any business is you could be the smartest guy in the world. You'll never be as smart as a large language model. You'll, in a niche topic, yes. But the reality is, the smarter models get, you couldn't process that amount of data. No one could go through a million uh, mammograms, right? To no, you could be the best doctor diagnosing cancer and be well trained. The reality is, you just don't have the capacity or the time with that a model can. So why I'm saying that, is it the end all that people say it is? No, because at the end of the day, I mean, there could be ethical questions around and decision making questions. But why not utilize it as a tool that helps you make better decisions? So, like anyone who denies it is like saying I'm smarter and cannot need help than anyone else. It's the same thing. Why wouldn't you ask someone else for help, who's another doctor, for a second uh, opinion, right? So imagine you could ask a billion doctors. So that's how I'm resonating it in the way of the sortie. And
If you would have asked my wife if she's listening to this, which she does occasionally, she would say, "Oh, you don't ask anyone else because you're a man." But that's obviously an unqualified comment on my side. I agree with you. So I think it really helps, because what computers are good at is obviously crunching numbers, right, and crunching a lot of data. The question to me is, well, how do you apply it? So how do you use that computing power, which obviously over time becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper as well because they scale. But the question is, coming back to the end users, how do you see AI being implemented in BPM tools, for example? Or how do you see them embedded into actual runtime processes?
Okay, so just in general, back to what you were saying, I I believe it'll be integrated in every type of role and position. That's my belief. Then that's where I it's not only I know people are focused on certain roles and jobs that'll play a bigger role, but I see it as a supporting tool for anyone and everyone that they can leverage to help them do their job faster, smarter, better. I mean, it's like back in the day when people were saying that computers are going to really replace humans. Did it replace them, or did it give them time to work on other things and do things quicker, smarter, faster? That's how I look at it. To be like from the base up,
Yeah,
whether it be a calculator or a computer. And will there be some jobs and industries that go away? Yes, just as in the past, things like my mom was in print, right? Print, the need for print has been reduced. Has it gone away 100%? No, but I'm just saying, what is it the industry it once was? No, retail. It's gone to e-commerce, right? So what I mean is the
yeah,
reality is, yes, some people get impacted by AI. So, but overall, it'll give everyone tools to be doing other things, which at the end of the day, we could be solving more problems and making life easier.
that
And
makes sense.
that's how I look at it. I just wanted to mention. Then specific to BPM, um,
Yeah,
that like focus on the topic for today is
yeah,
is to your point. Then the question is what part of BPM, right? So I
hmm
because I could break that down into if we keep it simple, like automation versus analysis, in its simplest terms, maybe. On the automation side, think of why do you have to manually build a form or an interface? It could be create an incident form and automatically it's built. So it's on the design from the conception of creation of applications. Build me. It's not only the form, but it could be a best practice process, which, by the way, we've done this in the tool where I could say, generate me an entire incident process. And it does end to end with the roles, with the tasks, with the descriptions, with the forms, with minimum or no coding. That's right. Is it the end all for every company? No. Meaning, but it's a great starting point. I just saved maybe a month of work doing that on my own. That I'm at, V1 came a lot faster. So did it replace anyone and everyone and any developer? No, because maybe we need to connect it to a system, and that system requires some custom code that maybe it doesn't have an available API. We know the technical challenge. However, it also did replace a lot of time and effort that went into producing that initial V1, and especially for um, creativity.
yeah. Well, talking about creativity, and I think this is an interesting point because what it sounds to me like in this case, when you're thinking about generating best practices, is a good example. The biggest part of this that this replaces is oftentimes bought knowledge. Like, I don't have to go out to a standard organization or to a management consulting company to define a standard procure to pay process. The
Exactly.
fact that Gen AI is pulling that out of a best practice library for me and creating those models. Like, I worked in management consulting. We designed standard supply chain processes that were not the differentiating characteristic of the company we were working for. Those were the piping. And if you're thinking, oh my goodness, my piping is such a differentiating capability for my company, like, for some, maybe, but I would say for the vast majority of companies, your piping should be as good as you can make it, but it's not a customer facing piping unless it is, and that's a bad thing. So, using standards that you would normally have to buy expertise for, but having AI generate that for you, what it shortcuts, it doesn't sound to me like it necessarily shortcuts a lot of lost jobs in the company that's using AI, but rather it shortcuts and takes away the need for them to employ external help to get the kind of expertise they wouldn't necessarily have in house by default.
And that's a excellent summary. I completely agree with you. That's actually what we're pitching, even on the content creation side. Instead of paying an external
Yeah.
consultant, which they may still, and they hire our organization for that on the consulting side, but I could do it quicker, smarter, faster because I'm using AI as part of our delivery. We tell you we're going to. It's integrated. So when we do drafts sometimes in companies where they're just like, we don't have processes in place, or this area of the business is very immature. So come with processes. You know, the big five consulting will say, we're coming with processes because they've done the time and effort to invest in building some of these. But the reality is now they're available to everyone for free. Not fully free, right? There's a concept of token.
And you said the word creativity, and in that saying, I think we want to hone in on that because it's an important part of the puzzle. Is your most valuable thing, at least my opinion, on the process side, is when your engineers, your knowledge experts, your core team has the latitude to be creative, to
Mm-hmm.
come up with novel delivery models for your products and services, to do new product development and introduction to the marketplace, to find ways of beating your competition that go around the bread and butter. And so it sounds to me like what you're doing, what you commit AI to do for an organization, is to pull away the amount of effort required to get to functional, allowing all of the work or the majority of the work to get from functional to exceptional.
So to your point, one is whether it's in-house or a consultant, you're relying on that person. That's one person.
Mhm.
So what that means is that's that one person's experience that you're relying on. What if that person be in-house or external, could have a million people that he asked when he designed that process or that interface as a helper,
Mhm.
as he himself can leverage on the fly. It doesn't matter to me if you're internal, or external. It's invaluable. I'll give you an example. We just, with hiring of designers, right? That application product designers, you're relying on one person's creativity. But the best answer of anyone who's a product designer says, I use AI. Why? Because now I have an amazing assistant. He comes up with ideas. And this becomes now product specific to the business. It's not only like, call it back office supporting processes, which of course are evident and obvious how much you can leverage from the outside world because they're probably not your competitive advantage and not where you want to be investing tons of time and money. Right? That's the reality, whether that be on automation or on documentation and improvement, because
Mhm.
they're they're out there. But on your core as well, why only trust or think to Roland's creativity when it comes to user UX design? When
Yeah.
it doesn't mean you don't do any work. It doesn't mean that this replaces that guy's job, but he has an assistant to help him with that UX design that gives him ideas that, oh yeah, that would be much more user friendly. That's how I look at it. It's assisting everyone to do their job quicker, faster, better. And anyone who adopts it early on will see that, like, wow, I didn't think of that, and that accepting change.
Mhm.
Yeah, can you give us a couple of examples? Obviously, I get the high level value prop, and by the way, don't buy into that Roland guy to define nice interfaces and all that stuff. You must talk about somebody else. But when you look at this in the tools, your tools, where do you see high level items that are of interest and may or may not be on your roadmap?
Okay, so to your point, things we've actually done already, forget about roadmap, that are done and in production, we already have. We've used shape detection. So for what did we use detection? We took models and then retrained it specific for processes. So you can actually whiteboard a process, whether that be with sticky notes or with drawing on a whiteboard, take a picture on
Mhm.
your phone, immediately digitize that. So you go from workshop to digital version in a second. That not only does it do shape detection based on uh, it could be based on the color, could be the same shape, right? If you take a sticky paper and turn it, it's a decision point versus straight. But
Yep.
it's also the what's called the arrow detection. And by the way, that's the much more complex piece because there are no good models on the market. We researched everywhere, even though there's some papers written on quality error detection, because error detection has, as you know, simple processes go backwards. Approvals, routings,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they cross each other. And it gets even more complex when it's not a digital version, which is still complex, by the way. But when it's a handwritten, it's even worse because you have lines going over. How do you find the entry point and the exit point? So we actually used highly accurate models around image recognition of even people and joints and retrained it for process so that we have a strong result to track arrows. We also did uh, using a model for text extraction. So OCR is nothing new, but the reality is when you're getting into handwritten, there's contextual and quality that can be applied with a model at a higher accuracy rate than a standard OCR. Uh, that's all just for taking a picture or processing digital images. Then another solution we've built using AI, and it's also available for 2 years now. Obviously, meaning we're not on V1s on some of these products. We use NLP, so natural language processing, for those of you who don't know, which has everything to do with data semantics. So what that means is we can process unstructured documents. Let's call them standard operating procedures, work instructions, guides, and actually extract processes and related content. So you can send me, you look at a pharma, they might have 200,000 SOPs, uh, and all in all different formats, depending on their acquisitions, depending on the country, depending on who wrote it. And there's no way to say, okay, there's a regulation update. What is impacted across our business? It's like
Mm-hmm.
needle in a haystack, right? So by processing and digitizing these things, we actually can fragment those that content into actual processes. So we're building process maps out of unstructured text stocks, and that all has to do with data semantics against the phrasal semantics and sentinel semantics. So to not get too technical, what that means is there's
Okay. Yeah.
uh, there's words, and then there's how these words form sentences, and then there's how these
Mm.
sentences sit in the overall text, meaning which paragraph and related content.
Hmm.
So by using models, now I know in this context, this uh, role name you use, let's call it account manager, is actually responsible
Hmm.
versus the sales manager, even though it's written in a sentence, is accountable because of the semantics of the text and the verbs and the adjectives. So not only are we
Hmm.
generating and extracting the KPIs, the risks, the controls, the tasks, the processes, and remember the relationships, that's complicated, right? Between tasks when you're talking about a meta model in a flat doc. But then on top of it, we're also extracting the relationships amongst all this content, meaning they're linked already. This is a role, and this role is accountable for this task and responsible for this system. So I think the best way I
Hmm.
could explain it to everyone is like it's a graph model that you're extracting out of flat text. Very, very cool, very, very powerful, and not something we could never do without AI, right? I mean, you could, but it's like writing a billion rules, and the problem is each document, right, is unstructured. So you couldn't write a hard coded rule for everything.
Yeah, that's a subscribing like context and meaning to content, which I think has often been the hardest part of the import process. Which is, you get a flat set of data, but that data means nothing unless you have some way to contextualize it. Well, it sounds almost a little bit like a Markov chain but it's a sort of reversing it to see what it's connected to. That's super cool though, and I think that's an interesting way to talk about the technology. We're gonna actually take a brief break. I know we always say this, but people's brains are burning. I mean, certainly mine is. And we're gonna ask a couple questions to our audience. Take a brief music break for you to cool down. And return with our friend Scott after that. But in the meantime, think about what you've seen in your organization with regards to AI use or piloting or conversations around it. Are you using it today? Are you using it sanctioned? So it's an organizational mandate. Are you using AI informally, so on your own to complete tasks or to augment your work? And what expectations do you have today on how your role will be augmented or changed by the introduction and usage of AI? We'll leave you for a moment and come back with our second section, the how.
Love won't let you down, won't let you down. Yeah, hey, I need, hey, yeah, I need your love, won't let you down. Hey, I need, yeah, I need your love, won't let you down, won't let you down.
And welcome back. Scott, very interesting conversation. But I get the feeling you're not done yet with what AI can do in process management suites or whatnot. So let me just come back to my initial question. What end users will see in the short, medium, and long term perspective?
Yeah, and so exactly, just to wrap up in what we've already done and the roadmap for the future that I see, uh, the other two major items we've integrated in the platform already. One that we've discussed briefly is content creation and improvement, meaning that's really the generative AI side of it, not just we talked about forms and processes, but really all your
Hmm.
documentation, right? Now you can say, write the procedure to create a new account in Amos or in SAP or in Maximo. Why manually write these procedures? You can give it precise details and it builds it for you, or give me the best practice risks for ISMS with their related controls that I should adopt for teleworking. Super precise, builds it all automatically, So that we've built throughout every module within our system, not just for process, but risk controls, rules, policies, requirements, KPI, so on and so forth. And maybe the last one that we already have within the system is related to retrieval augmented generation, right? Which you've seen in other products is chatbots. So having a quality helper that instead of looking for
Yeah.
stuff now you have all your processes and documents and controls and risks, and you could ask it questions. How do I create an incident? And it returns a step-by-step summary of the procedure, including the form on to create it directly. So
Hmm.
that's really that whole new way of interacting with data and processes. And that's where I truly believe there's going to be a huge adoption uh, change when you process thinking in general.
Yeah, especially when it comes to whatever the interaction between the human and the computer. I'm always thinking like, how long does it take until we're in Star Trek mode? Tea, Earl Grey, hot. And you just speak to that damn thing, and you don't have to type and whatnot. Because to me, when I read articles about how to create the best prompt, I'm thinking back to MS DOS times. What were the commands that I had to put in? Oh, CD and whatever,
Mm-hmm.
all that type of stuff. Obviously, in the 21st century flavor, but that is missing the point. The point is, well, be as precise as you can, and then why do I have to type again? Aren't we in the 21st century? And you just can't speak to that thing.
And what's great about it, right, is the difference between like an Elasticsearch traditional versus AI for people to understand is in traditional search, you needed the keyword, meaning you would have had to
Hmm.
say Maximo. Now I don't. I just say ERP or MRO. It knows that
Mm-hmm.
Maximo is my MRO. You so and we've done some really cool things where you talk about one thing and it gives you the correct result because it understands the relationships even though you don't have that in your content. That's really the power of large language models and the training that goes into that. And then but what I want to say is applying it to your data. So not just bringing stuff from the internet that to the corporate world, what we were talking about.
Hmm.
How are they going to leverage this? Because their concern is I don't want my data going out. Number one, and two is I don't want you to do something that is not our process procedure that we've captured, because it could be liability issues there based on the amount of drug that
Mhm.
you disperse, right? These types of things. So but we've already done this. You can apply the technologies out there that you can leverage the models, but apply it to your specific data. And and you talk about Star Trek. That's the last one we've actually already done too. Is integration with Oculus, meaning with mixed reality, where
Hmm.
you have
Mm.
augmented reality, virtual reality. Now you
Hmm.
already you put on the lenses, you're looking at an engine, think about an airline, and automatically, to your point, you don't need to search type. It pulls up the related procedure, and you can actually walk through the process related to what you're doing on how to replace a part, how to provide maintenance to an engine, how to build an engine. More. This is already in use in real world manufacturing, maintenance, pharma. So this is really cool stuff, right? Like that's that roadmap you were talking about. That is like the ultimate
Hmm.
future. But no, it is available already. It's going to take time on adoption. There is a hardware cost to it, and the speed at which hardware is changing. That's always a challenge. Is right, hardware can't move sometimes as fast as software.
Yeah, who wants to put a $3,500 Apple Vision Pro on his face, which is heavy, and then you have to crawl through the wing of an airplane and whatnot? If you could had some heads-up display in regular glasses,
Exactly.
which are much more comfortable and might have some speakers so you can get your instructions being read to you, right? And not just to read it and
Ooh.
whatnot. I'm 100% with you.
And that's already done too, by the way, with the speaking. But note, I'll tell you, the
Hmm.
reason why speaking isn't as popular is because often it's loud, like in
Yeah,
manufacturing
Yeah.
places.
yeah.
So just note, what's really cool though, that's already implemented is it does eye movement, right? So based on what your eye's looking at, it pulls it up, and then you can navigate through your process too based on your eyes. You don't need to talk, and you don't need to use your fingers, because the problem with the voice, I told you, is noise.
I wonder how much of this is actually like supported by the existence of video games and how they've chosen to design their heads up displays. I feel like this is when you have an intuitive heads up display from what you'd be familiar with if you're playing Fallout or if you're playing Call of Duty, if you're playing any of these like, first person games, if you're used to having access to those resources and that the interaction with the environment works a certain way, if AI is able to bring that to your real world, it's more of an intuitive fit than necessarily having to go through and learn manual procedures, buy a book, by a way that you don't necessarily interact with your world outside of your work time. That's cool. I think it might be able to shortcut some of the learning and development from taking people's existing habits and then transposing new context onto them.
And you bring up a good point. I mean, it's like anything. You talk about roadmap and where I see it. Often that goes with the generation. That's how I look at it. The
Yeah.
adoption of technology is aligned with what were you raised on? What were you using? I was, the first Nintendo generation. I was not the VR headset gaming, but generations today are growing up with this technology. So you also have to think of it that it will take time to do adoption. Of course, uh, you could say often the technology was available, but the adoption wasn't. You talk about like Google Glass, right? It's not that there was
Hmm.
nothing there, but was that heavily adopted worldwide? No, right? That's the reality. It didn't. It
Yeah.
didn't get the buy-in. But I'm just trying to say is that it's also a generational thing. The reality is that you try to take someone new on the workforce and tell them to read a manual, he's not going to. Let's be very honest here.
I'm hearing that um, my fond appreciation of the magic that happens in what I call my fridge is not high tech anymore.
Oh, Roland, it hasn't been high tech in a long time. I'm sorry, my friend. But
It just tells you how old I am.
here's the question, Scott, though, and I want to get to this because I think it's really important for those who are listening on the line, particularly practice leaders. So you're changing, I would say, the way of working, right? You're redoing an approach. In some ways, it is the same but faster, or the same with fewer human interventions. But in other ways, it is changing the mode, it's changing expectations. How do you see practice leaders integrating AI into how they deliver their services? What concerns they need to be aware of? And can you give us a couple of like very specific use cases where you've seen a practice adopt an AI powered approach for process intelligence, process insights, process analysis, process improvement, that sort of thing,
Mhm.
and what it took to get there?
Okay, that I mean, you talk about short term exactly there. I would say the biggest
Yeah.
problem right now, we're at the stage of a bit of confusion, meaning a lot of talk, a lot of buzz. But why I state of confusion is because enterprises don't know yet how to properly govern it and haven't all set out their policies, their guidelines, their training. So they know they need it, they know they want it, they don't know how, partially. So we've seen that as a challenge with our clients where the business user who wants to use the technology is like, I love this, I want it, this is incredible. And then you have corporate who's laying the law like, whoa, no, where does this data reside? How do they analyze the data? Whose data? What, there's a
Mhm.
lot of questions, even to the point where some of the companies in the banking system already and some of our highly regulated industries want to see the model, which becomes your intellectual property partially as well, right? So, how deep do you go in terms of the assessment of risk within the organization? And that's why I say it's a state of confusion because there's
Hmm.
so many cool tools and so many, it's not just our tool, it's everywhere. And they're not really
Oh
sure
yeah.
how to manage and govern it properly in the companies on the enterprise side. I will say that I'm seeing that time and time again. Uh, and then on the business user, they're going ahead and adopting it on their own.
Without governance, without all these supports in place from the enterprise,
Of course, JM.
AI as an intrusion.
Of course, JM. You know,
I mean, that feels like a governance nightmare, Roland. I mean,
I've seen that in real life on Slack. You know, by the way, you're encouraged to use ChatGPT or any AI thing, but don't paste any proprietary code in there. You know, just as a housekeeping item. So,
wow.
of course they do, because humans
Half
per
measures.
se, no,
Correct.
they want to have the easy way in a good sense. You know, they want to be the fastest and want to move on and get stuff done. Some of them are just lazy, but the majority of the people want to do good things with it. But Scott, what I'm thinking is, obviously governance is one big topic, you know, but what happens, or what do organizations also have to bring, you know, because what I see is tools that are hooked up on a generic large language model, you know. You need to train obviously that thing on your data. What are the
Mhm.
efforts that an organization will have to do on top of, say, getting the slate clean from a rules perspective? What else do they have to do to implement AI in a proper way?
So on their actual data, this is something we've already implemented. There's already the concept of vectorizing your data. So that
Hmm.
is the ability to actually retrieve the results from an AI large language model, even though it was not trained on your specific data. And there's all sorts of ways of doing this. And also, one thing people don't know or think of is the limitations related to tokens, meaning the tokens you can give a model, like GPT has a limit. Let's say I could send 3,000 tokens to the API, but 3,000
Hmm.
tokens, the simplest thing I could say to someone basic who doesn't know it is, let's say, characters in a way. So that's not a very big document, really. So then you have to get into things like chunking, sending things in pieces. Then you have to, how can you return
Hmm.
data correctly and speed and fast and process all this in seconds? So there is a lot of complexity that goes into it, but note there are solutions already readily available. And Llama actually came out with some really good stuff, Llama parsing, with their new model that they released. Really amazing facilities. That's one. That's on the implementation side. but you don't actually have to train it specifically on your data. That adds
Hmm.
augments the value you can generate, but it could be integrated to your data even though you didn't train it. And that's often a common misconception of people thinking when they send their data to a model. Unless it's a self-training model using your data, it doesn't necessarily, it was pre-trained already. It's just processing your data, your questions, and the results based on content, even though it was not trained with it. It's like a simplicity I could say earlier. I train a model, you take a picture of your whiteboard. I didn't train it with your whiteboard. You get it?
Right.
Could you?
You train it with the types of things that are on
Yeah,
whiteboards.
correct. Exactly. So like that's the simplest way I can make it. But your actual data, we're not keeping it, we're not holding it. It's your data and we're just treating it.
Yeah, which is great because there's no learning effort, if you will. You don't have to plan it in your implementation plan. It basically ships with the product, right? You just open the door and say, okay, here you go.
Like there are concerns like GPT.
Uh-huh.
GPT says 30 days, right? They're not retraining. They do say that, right? But they might say your request they can hold. But note there's ways to also not maintain requests
Yeah.
because there's also a value, right?
Hmm.
If you can ask multiple questions off your last questions because you can dive deeper.
Sure.
But if I don't know what your last question is,
Hmm.
then how am I going to get more precise? So there's all these things of building off of previous questions.
How do you see the balance between using more generic and more open available models versus the desire for companies to actually train models on their own data, create their own proprietary model, and use that proprietary? And there's two reasons for saying use a proprietary model. Number one is for competitive advantages, and number two is to avoid potential legislative consequences or regulatory consequences from perceived monopoly or non-compete situations of multiple organizations using the same model, like the example that was given by the FTC on hotel price fixing.
So to your point, I absolutely believe there'll be specific models, but for competitive advantage, meaning you're going to do that
Mm-hmm.
work and effort for something that isn't readily available on the market, that is a supporting or a process that isn't core to your business and differentiate you. You're going to do because it's time, it's effort, it's cost, it's complexity. It's not, let's just say there's cost involved in that. So if something's available and it's a supporting and not related to our core business, they should be using what's available on the market. If it's core and
Mm-hmm.
differentiating and part of your solution, then of course you should be moving to the level of your own models and your own training, and because it's a competitive advantage at the end of the day. So it depends, it's a hard question because I think it's the answer is both depending on what you're actually going to be doing. And maybe just one more thing to add on that is that you asked me like, well, whether it's someone's proprietary model or if it's using a large language model, the reality is you're going to use the ones that are available within the tools, whatever the model is behind. Why I'm
Right.
saying that, to your point, you don't want to become a prompt engineer to be able to generate a high quality result
Hmm.
because it's more complex to get really high quality results. So the tools that are implementing, even if it's another model behind it, they took over the heavy lifting to make sure that you can ask simple questions to get high quality results. If you understand the context, it doesn't matter if you're building a video, analyzing an image, generating a process. There's intelligence that was done, and people don't know how to get the highest quality results. So someone else is doing that for you, going through the ringer so that you can ask simple questions and get good content or that you can leverage.
Yeah. That makes sense, but I'm also a little bit aware of the time that we have. So I'd like to ask one more topic, content topic around this. And this is all about where do you see drawbacks using AI technology? Where do you see, for example, ethic concerns? I remember a conversation in the German media was about some Mercedes engineers, with self-driving cars. What
Mm-hmm.
happens? Do you run over the uh, a group of school kids, or do you run over the grandmother on the other side of the road?
Mm-hmm.
If the car has to make the decision, the answer is none of the above. But still, that's a different story. So where do you see limitations? Where do you see concerns? where do you see dangers using the AI technology?
There's those big discussions, but in my opinion, at the end of the day, is if a human signs off on it, I see it as an aid rather than an ethical decision of how it was trained. But of course, the more it becomes autonomous in doing work and making decisions, there's absolutely a risk there, of another one that comes up often relates to hiring and filtering through candidates. It's a great tool to get what you're looking for
Mhm.
faster, but if it's based on race or age or gender, it's actually providing different results. There's a problem there. So that's tricky because that's all done, now in the back end. And the more autonomous it gets, of course, there's a risk of ethical concerns and biases. But you can also argue that humans have biases as well. So do you put controls in place that JM and Roland didn't only hire, 50-year-old white male?
JMs and Rollins.
I'm just saying that there's you could answer the same ethical questions for humans just as much so. And the key there is, in my opinion, you got to put controls in place,
Right.
whether they're human or automated, both ways to try and reduce the risk of these things taking
Well,
place in the
yeah, but
workplace.
I'm thinking your example that you gave earlier. The poor mechanic that crawls through the wing of an aircraft. And we all know that large language models, I forgot how they call it,
Hallucinates.
hallucinating, exactly, that they babble and
Yeah.
babble and babble, but very convincingly. So if I would apply this to your example, who makes sure that the mechanic gets the right instructions, the correct instructions for the problem at hand? And if he doesn't, well, what's the liability behind it? And I'm thinking about that lawsuit from a couple of weeks ago where an airline customer sued the airline because their chatbot gave them wrong information and they paid more than they were supposed to pay. And then the airline tried to wiggle themselves out and say, yeah, but that was just a chatbot. It's not an employee. And the court said, stop that nonsense. Your chatbot is an employee.
Hmm.
You're
Hmm.
responsible. Go reimburse that poor lady. So how do you see that? How do you make sure that you get the right information served in a critical moment? I think nobody cares about the invoicing and whatnot. Well, maybe some do, but I mean, like where limp and life is in danger.
I mean, in your example, I think it's less of a risk because there's a human there, meaning I would still give accountability because it doesn't mean that person didn't have to be trained and he can validate like you would have today, is this the correct procedure? Because you can argue the same thing.
Hmm.
Did I go and get the correct procedure? Right? Whether it was in paper
Hmm.
form or if I called you up, I still have an accountability there to make sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to, best on my best knowledge and experience. This is just a job aid to try to find the answers and quicker that I can check. Probably today, because it's on a time crunch, to your point, I'm not checking. I'm just going based off my gut of experience.
Yeah, you
So,
trust. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Right. So, in that case, I think it's less, you still have a human aspect accountability. When there's zero human intervention, in your example with the chatbot, that's that fully autonomous to a customer asking a question. And if there's no validation there, you definitely have a challenge and a problem. Do you filter and create controls, like you said, that anything related to certain topics you don't actually provide responses on, that it triggers a phone call? That's all I'm just trying to say is that, yeah, but it also, how many times have you called a call center, they gave you the wrong answer? Let's be honest here. It's happened to me 1,000 times.
It's true.
Yeah, that's a complete different topic because I think that the human workforce uh, gets trained to become dumber over time because you slice the processes in those little atomic pieces that nobody sees what the downstream effect is.
The humans are flawed and make errors just as much.
But
Yeah.
here's the thing, and this is a big differentiator here. I think that people know people are flawed. And if I'm talking to somebody, there's this whole idea of taking my advice with a grain of salt. I feel
Mhm.
like right in some cases, AI or the answers provided automatically through chatbots or other sorts of automatic generation that appear on your screen as if by magic, generated by the processes, have an illusion of certainty, and we can't we can't forget that illusion of certainty. The chatbot gives you a definitive answer. A human goes, "Oh yeah, I think you probably have to be a direct relative if you want to get the bereavement fair." The chatbot goes, "Relatives are given a bereavement fair." And I think there's just the human interaction with that. One is to doubt another person's, maybe not fully confident answer. And the other is to just trust a set of text written on a screen because it's almost like it's been published. It was published to them, at least, as a single interaction, which leads me to a question that I think is really important: is from an ethical concern perspective, how much are we working to try and improve our models to the point where we can be so confident that obligation, regulatory obligation, ethical violations, these sorts of things can be avoided? Like, how much are we trying to evolve the technology, or how much is the market just expecting that people will eventually like get used to it? It's like the old, if people got used to wearing seatbelts, people got used to having milk in their lunches at school, people got used to this stuff. Did they want it? Did they accept it? Not really, but they got used to it. So what is like, from your perspective as an investor as well, what are you expecting the market and the technology to do?
So, I mean, you asked a lot of loaded questions there. First, on the regulatory side, as you know, in Europe, they've already implemented some regulations directly for AI and are
Yeah.
trying to control it way more and have progressed on that front. So, do I see that going away? No. Is it challenge to police? Absolutely. And will you ever have the uncertainty of this is the correct answer and liable source? No. But I think to your point, that's just as much of a learning curve of everything else. You go back 10 years, if Facebook said it, it must be true. Look at how how they're using Facebook for ways to control who's selected as your president, right? But it's someone posts it on Facebook, so it must be true. So what I mean is maybe now, maybe there's probably still a ton of people who still believe that, but I'm just trying to say, I think with time, people will realize just because an AI chatbot or was written on the web, it doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate because you can challenge that of everything of the internet. That's like this types of questions. I remember I was the same thing. I was, the Netscape start of internet, uh, dating me back in high school, and the same questions were coming up, right? Anyone could write this. Anyone could publish something. What are the ethical concerns that people now there's no validation of content? Do you just read anything on the internet and believe it? I don't. Do some people? Yes. But I'm just trying to say I feel like it's the same types of questions, it's just another era. That's my perspective. I know not everyone may agree.
We hope to be able to use this at a ground level, right? In the creating of the processes and building a practice and being able to make an organization run better. And I'm hoping that's something that our audience, we're going to take a brief break for people to ponder through this. I mean, hoping our audience has had a chance to do some research, and hopefully through this episode has learned a little bit more about the AI and helped to hone their stance on AI and ethics as part of their practice or as part of their organization as a whole, part of their interactions as an end user or a consumer. How do you see your future, our dear audience, with AI as a companion, AI as part of how you do business? And how do you govern, or how do you see governing the AI you work with and managing the AI landscape that you live in? We'll leave you for a moment to come back with our final section, some conclusions, and a farewell to the episode.
Baby, you ain't no shooting star. You ain't as good as you think you are. There's no shame in giving up. You'll be happier in the long run, 'cause you ain't no shooting star.
And welcome back from this really badly needed break because, like JM said half an hour ago, now my brain is burning on this. But let me do a little summary for each and every one of us through that episode in whatever 3-5 bullets. So we obviously started with talking about, okay, what is AI? What is AI in the connection to BPM? And then we were talking about it, and thanks Scott for the really vivid examples that you had. Well, what can users expect? Today, short term, midterm, long term on this. And then we spoke about what it takes to bring in AI into your organization. And we closed out with a short conversation around ethics and what people can expect and what they can't expect. And I'm disappointed in my fellow humans, but that's a different story we can obviously talk about a little bit later. More importantly, though, Scott, is, well, how can I've listened to that episode now and think, hey, that Scott guy, that's a very interesting person. So how can people reach out to you and start a conversation with you?
You can reach me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect, as well as you can email me directly, scott.armstrong@interfacing.com.
And of course, we're going to put all those links into the show notes. And JM, I think that's a little hint for you to talk about the benefits of looking at whatsyourbaseline.com, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, friends. And that's a huge thank you to all of our listeners out there who've had a chance to come along with us on this journey. If you liked what you heard, if you hated what you heard, oh my goodness, you can engage with us on all of our various channels. Hit us up on LinkedIn. You can go and take a look at whatsyourbaseline.com. We publish all this content. In fact, you'll see show notes and more details, some stats, interesting things from our friend Scott on our What's Your Baseline article for this episode, specifically at whatsyourbaseline.com/episode 68. Well, come join us in the conversation, tell your friends, and we will see you next time. But until then, I have been J.M. Erlinson.
I have been Scott Armstrong, also known as Ippy to my friends.
And my name is Roland Volt.
And we will see you in the next one.